Bună seara! Discutăm cu domnul John Florescu, autorul unor documentare de acum celebre în România. Astăzi la 23:30 la ProTV, în ziua alegerilor, se va difuza documentarul Trump vs. Clinton, What Means to Us? Ce înseamnă pentru noi acest lucru? Îl întrebăm, avem o discuție cu domnul Florescu și îl întreb direct, John, what means to us?
Well, it means a lot, I think. I know that Francois Hollande was saying that this election today in the United States is a global election, and I think perhaps there's an element of truth there. There are very big issues that we focused on, and we pulled out 5 issues in our show, which is an hour show. One issue was Brexit, and would Europe stay together? Another issue was ISIS and the threat in Europe here. Another issue was the refugees, the boat people. Less an issue in Romania, but very much an issue in countries around here. Another issue was Russia and Putin, and how far will that situation, cause tension here. And an issue that came up, which we found very interesting, was cyber war, and that popped up in our conversations. We had 8 conversations from LA to New York, to Miami, to Washington, and Richmond, Virginia.
Which is your opinion? You are betting on which candidate?
I mean, who do I think is going to win?
Yes.
Well, I think Mrs. Clinton will probably pull through unless there's a very big Brexit factor. You have to remember that in England, the night before Brexit, the stay in Europe crowd was up by 10%. That was the night before. And going into this, we have a variance of 3 to 4 points. Now, I have a feeling that it will be difficult for Donald Trump to make up that deficit, but also I have a feeling that a lot of people who are voting for Mrs. Clinton are not doing with 100% enthusiasm, so they just may stay home. In Philadelphia, there was a transit strike last week. Well, a lot of voters won't go if the subway isn't working.
Bill Sanders is enthusiastic or not?
No, I don't think Sanders is. I think Sanders' voice got a little bit lost in the Clinton family. And in some ways, the protest vote is still with Donald Trump. In odd ways, they're anti-establishment figures. It's ironic, Donald Trump, a billionaire, represents the working class of America to the workers of America. And that's because in the United States, people don't have the same sort of envy they have, say, in France or something. And that, if somebody does well, they go, wow, I wish I could be like him. As opposed to, oh, I wish he'd get thrown out of his helicopter or his plane or something like that. So Donald Trump, with his financial success, has captured the imagination of the middle class and the working class whose incomes haven't moved much, not in 1 year, but in 30 years.
Let's return to what means to us. What means to us regarding Russia, which is our closest, not say enemy, but...
Yeah, well, the situation with Russia is precarious. I mean, Donald Trump was somewhat admiring of the strong arm of Vladimir Putin. Mrs. Clinton, I think, will be much tougher with Putin than Obama, whom she served for 4 years as Secretary of State. I think Mrs. Clinton, in most international affairs, including in Syria, will be more firm than Obama. In the case of Donald Trump, I think there's always a risk that he will think like a businessman, and he'll trade and swap. In other words, you give me peace in Syria, and I'll give you a bit of a little more of the Ukraine, or a little bit of Estonia, or something like that. And so I think that in that way, because Donald Trump doesn't have a specific ideological orientation, he's a businessman, he'll be highly pragmatic, and he'll weigh and adjust and look at things. Having said that, a lot of politicians say certain things before they get elected, and once they get elected, they do something else. So what it means to Europe, I think the security of the United States is very important right now to all of Europe. Donald Trump did say that, they have to pay up. They have to pay 2%, and they have to pay the full 2%. And as he said in our show tonight on Pro TV at 11:30, he says, why would the United States go to war over countries you don't even know the name of, like maybe Latvia or Estonia?
Where would be Romania in that trading game of Trump?
In a funny way, you would say it's risky, only because, the big players can play and organize the table the way they like. But on the other hand, I think there's an elemental fairness, probably in the way Trump thinks, that Romania has been a very solid ally of the United States, more solid than Czech, more solid than Hungary, more solid than just about anybody. And I think people notice that in the United States. Romania is a solid point. That's why we have large military operations here. In fact, we have, even in our show this evening, we show some of those operations. So for my comfort's sake, I think I'd take, from a military defense security point of view, I think Mrs. Clinton's a better choice for Romania. She's been here. Her husband was here in 97, as you remember. She's more of a Europeanist in the Atlantic mode of things. Her husband went to university in England, at Oxford. Her daughter went to Oxford. She knows most of the leaders of Europe, and she's been probably to every country in Europe.
Who is afraid of Trump? Should we be afraid of Trump?
The establishment, and when I say the establishment, I'd say it in a wider term, both the political establishment and the media establishment. And I think he's somewhat justified in feeling that the media establishment tends to be a little bit very anti-Donald Trump and a little lacking impartiality. I myself am a Democrat. I was communications director for the Democratic Party in the United States many years ago in '85, and I was a little surprised at how the tilt with the mass media, I'm saying New York Times and Washington Post and CNN, there was a very clear tilt against Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump had more of the sympathies of Fox News, but it's unlike the tradition of America, which tends to be fairly neutral in the news coverage. I think the Associated Press, perhaps, is the finest example of that. So who's afraid? I think super wealthy are afraid because Donald Trump says, the hedge fund people have to pay more. I think the elites are afraid. There's not one CEO in the top 100 companies in the United States who's supporting Donald Trump. So they feel he'll destabilize the system. So there's two big groups right there.
You have a lot of thinkers in your documentary. Which is the most interesting answer?
We have a lot of what?
Thinkers.
Thinkers. Well, I would say that all of them are very interesting. Haas, who's president of the Council on Foreign Relations, very intelligent man. He advises Obama from time to time. He was saying that the era of, I asked him the question, is Europe America's first love? And he said he didn't think so, that American strategic attention has turned elsewhere, that Europe is too beset by problems, it's poor, it's divisive, and it isn't unified. It's the Kissinger remark that if you want to call Europe, who do you call? And that lack of central focus is a huge issue when they're talking about creating a European army. Well, who would run that? When we're talking to McCall, who's chairman of Homeland Security, he's in charge of the cyber and intelligence defense of the United States, he said that when they tried to reach out to Europe before Paris and before Brussels, that they couldn't get a clear answer, even though they were behind. And he actually called for a second Marshall Plan to stress the need for cyber and defense security. CIA Director Wolseley in Washington, we interviewed right opposite the White House, and he was saying that the threat of cyber interference is now the biggest military threat in the United States, in Europe, and around the world, because with cyber you can deactivate banking systems, manufacturing, water supplies, transportation, and so forth. So they say that is the biggest issue, and it's an issue that was raised time and time again by our guests.
Between you and me now, if the cyber attacks are very important, what about the mail scandal of Clinton?
Which email scandal?
The email scandal, yes.
Yeah. Well, the email scandal has been going back and forth and back and forth. Clearly, Mrs. Clinton was not paying attention to the protocols that have put other people in jail, actually. People say of the Clintons that sometimes instead of asking permission, they prefer to ask for forgiveness. Now, in the end, I didn't see anything in those emails that was particularly horrific. Earlier on, they were making a big point that Mrs. Clinton never picked up the phone during Benghazi when the U.S. Embassy was attacked. I think that in those emails, I have not seen anything particularly shocking. However, there have been connections made, and they have to be proven out, maybe by an FBI investigation, of whether or not the foundation, the Clinton Foundation, was used to trade for access to the State Department.
The Black Swan? You know,
Excuse me?
the Black Swan.
The Black Swan. You mean the,
which one could be?
I don't follow the question.
It's a sociologist word referring to something very emotional that happens and change the result of elections.
Well, this election, very sadly, is not about issues. Normally we talk about defense, or we talk about incomes, or we talk about abortion, or gun control, or the economy. All these issues that are normally dominating. In the United States, this is kind of like a referendum on the other. Mrs. Clinton wants everybody to think that Donald Trump is dangerous, out of control, and will get the world in big trouble. Donald Trump wants to convince everybody that Mrs. Clinton is untrustworthy, unlikable, and it's time for her to go. So what they've done is to try to point the attention on the other and make this a referendum. Who do you dislike? Do you dislike more the person you distrust or fear?
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. We will look forward to your documentary.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much for having it at such a quick notice.
Hello.
Okay, Val.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.